There is a strange weight in a person's last written words, whether it's a farewell or a thought that trails into silence. Final journal entries carry the raw imprint of a life about to end. Some reveal courage in the face of death, others expose fear or despair, and some remain haunting mysteries, leaving us to wonder what happened in those final moments. These are the voices that never spoke again, preserved only in ink at the edge of life itself. We'll uncover them tonight on this trip into the dark tunnel. Christopher McCandless, a restless young man who sometimes went by the pseudonym Alexander Supertramp, was only 24 years old when he set out to conquer the Alaskan wild. He wasn't a seasoned woodsman or a hardened trapper. He had little hunting skills and no training in how to preserve food. Instead, he carried a .22 caliber rifle, 10 pounds of rice, a basic road map, a few books, and an idealistic belief that self-reliance and spirit alone could sustain him. In April of 1992, he reached an abandoned Fairbanks City Transit bus along the Stampede Trail in Alaska. For him, this was a sign, a base for him to embrace his new existence. For his legacy, it would become a symbol of his undoing. He kept a succinct journal of his daily activities. At first, he felt triumphant, smiling in the many self-portraits he took with his camera. The bus became his magic bus, a home at the edge of civilization. His early journals mostly detail his catches for the day, foraged berries and small animals, birds, squirrels, and porcupines. But his rifle was too weak for larger game, and his inexperience with butchering meant every meal was meager, with lots of potential meat wasted. Still, his entries at this point seemed to lack understanding of just how fragile Chris's situation really was. As late spring set in, the tone changed. The bag of rice, his only reliable food supply, was most likely gone by this point. On day 43, he managed to take down a moose with a small caliber rifle. But without knowledge of how to store meat or preserve what he caught, it quickly spoiled, as would be well documented in the next few entries. May 1992, day 44. Butchering extremely difficult. Fly and mosquito hordes. Remove intestines, liver, kidneys, one lung, steaks. Get hindquarters and leg to stream. Day 48. Maggots already. Smoking appears ineffective. Don't know. Looks like disaster. I now wish I had never shot the moose, one of the greatest tragedies of my life. Day 50. Have given up on preserving much of moose. Return to berry fields. They are drying out. Live in mosquito hat. With the failure of preserving what could have been weeks of food from the moose kill, what started as a romantic vision of freedom was already turning into a battle against hunger and despair. June 1992, day 69. Rained in. River looks impossible. Lonely. Scared. The next month would only detail further meager catches and forages. Starvation and nutrient deficiency by this time was no doubt wreaking havoc on Chris's condition. July 1992, day 94. Extremely weak. Fault of potato seed. Much trouble just to stand up. Starving. Great jeopardy. Day 100. Made it, but in weakest condition of life. Death looms as serious threat, but too weak to walk out. Have literally become trapped in wild. No game. By July, his journal had become a desperate countdown. His body was failing. Chris believed he had poisoned himself, though it was starvation that slowly consumed him. His words, too weak to walk out, captured the grim truth. He had become a prisoner of the very wilderness he had sought to master. On the few remaining occasions where he did find the strength to go foraging, he also kept a note taped to the door of the bus, pleading for help in the event someone happened across his camp. "Attention, possible visitors. SOS, I need your help. I am injured, near death, and too weak to hike out of here. I am all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I am out collecting berries close by and shall return by this evening. Thank you, Chris McCandless. August, ? However, no help would arrive. With the last of his strength, with a wave and a smile, he took one final self-portrait, holding a note that indicated his resignation to his fate. I have had a happy life, and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all. Unfortunately for Christopher McCandless, starvation is a slow death, and these would not be his last words. He would linger for 6 more excruciating days. Day 107 of his journal would contain his final actual written words, beautiful blueberries. And days 108 through 112 would simply have an uneventful line scratched through them. The number for day 113 would be written, but Chris would not leave his mark that day. In less than 4 months since his arrival, the Alaskan wilderness claimed the life of Christopher McCandless. When moose hunters discovered his body weeks later, he weighed just 67 pounds. His journal, terse, hunting fragments, and his photos documenting his deteriorating state would be his only record of a dream collapsing into tragedy. As many know, his journey would be recorded in the 1996 best-selling book by Jack Krakauer, Into the Wild, and would be further romanticized in a feature film just a few years later. Christopher McCandless's adventure into the Alaskan wilderness is often remembered as noble and interpreted by many as a heroic tale of self-discovery and the rejection of shallow modernity. But his journal and further analysis of his situation over the years instead presents a harsh and tragic story of an idealistic young man undone by the wilderness he admired and by the cruel price of entering it without the skills to survive. At the turn of the 20th century, Antarctica was one of the last untouched places on Earth. A vast, frozen wilderness, brutal, unexplored, and irresistible to many nations eager to stake their claim on its secrets. For Great Britain, the man chosen to lead the charge was Captain Robert Falcon Scott, who was both a decorated naval officer and a skilled explorer. Having led and survived the previous British National Antarctic Expedition, also known as the Discovery Mission, in 1901. 9 years later, in 1910, Scott launched the Terra Nova expedition, with his ultimate goal to be the first to reach the geographic South Pole. The mission wasn't just about discovery, it was about prestige, science, and proving Britain's strength on the global stage, as well as solidifying Scott's reputation as a world-class expeditioner. However, the journey was plagued with issues from the very beginning. Even before arriving at the Antarctic coast, the ship was nearly destroyed in a storm, and then ended up stuck in pack ice for 20 days, which caused the team to arrive much later than they anticipated, and that much less time to prepare for the brutal Antarctic winter. What the team didn't know is this early misfortune would merely preface the tragedy that would ensue. Scott's journals, despite starting off optimistic, would record the descent. October 21st, 1911. The future is in the lap of the gods, but as a man, I feel that we are as near perfection as experience can direct. The men are in splendid condition, and the ponies keep up wonderfully. Everything looks well. We have an excellent chance to reach our goal, and spirits are high. If good fortune attends us, we shall accomplish the work for which we set out. At this stage, confidence still carried them across the ice. But within weeks, the problems began. The experimental snowmobiles broke down almost immediately, as their heavy weight meant they sunk too deep into the soft snow, and their poorly insulated engines seized in the cold. The ponies, chosen against expert advice, struggled in the deep drifts and freezing winds. By December, many of them had collapsed, and the surviving ponies ended up having to be shot for food. From that point onward, the men relied almost entirely on man-hauling sleds, dragging hundreds of pounds across the endless, icy frontiers with failing strength. To add further insult to even further injury, Scott's party would reach the South Pole, only to find a Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen's flag already planted. The race was lost. Spirits broke, and now the real ordeal, the return march, would begin. January 16th, 1912. Great God, this is an awful place, and terrible enough for us to have labored to it without the reward of priority. Well, it is something to have got here, and the wind may be our friend tomorrow. We have had a fat puller hoosh, in spite of our chagrin, and feel comfortable inside. Added a small stick of chocolate and the odd taste of a cigarette brought by Wilson. Now, for the run home and a desperate struggle. I wonder if we can do it. The team then turned northward, back to the coast, with their rations dwindling. Temperatures fell way lower than expected, and their bodies burned more calories than the food could ever replace. Depot caches, laid down months earlier, had been poorly planned and poorly stocked. The 1-ton depot, which was crucial for their survival, was placed further north than it should have been, forcing them to cover greater distances while lacking supplies. The following weeks would test their resolve to its limits. Lost track of dates, but I think the last correct. Tragedy all along the line. At lunch, the day before yesterday, poor Titus Oates said he couldn't go on. He proposed we should leave him in a sleeping bag. That we could not do, and induced him to come on to the afternoon march. In spite of its awful nature for him, he struggled on, and we made a few miles. At night, he was worse, and we knew the end had come. Should this be found, I want these facts recorded. Oates's last thoughts were of his mother, but immediately before he took pride in thinking that his regiment would be pleased with the bold way in which he met his death. We can testify to his bravery. He has borne intense suffering for weeks without complaint, and to the very last was able and willing to discuss outside subjects. He did not, would not, give up hope to the very end. He was a brave soul. This was the end. He slept through the night before last, hoping not to wake. But he woke in the morning, yesterday. It was blowing a blizzard. He said, "I am just going outside, and maybe some time." He went out into the blizzard, and we have not seen him since. I take this opportunity of saying that we have stuck to our sick companions to the last. In case of Edgar Evans, when absolutely out of food and he lay insensible, the safety of the remainder seemed to demand his abandonment, but Providence mercifully removed him at this critical moment. He died a natural death, and we did not leave him till 2 hours after his death. As well, we knew that poor Oates was walking to his death, but though we tried to dissuade him, we knew it was the act of a brave man and an English gentleman. We all hope to meet the end with a similar spirit, and assuredly, the end is not far. By mid-March, frostbite had blackened fingers and toes, snow blindness set in, and the men collapsed often from sheer exhaustion. Lawrence Titus Oates, crippled by gangrene and frostbite, sacrificed himself, stepping into the blizzard so the others might carry on without him, using up what meager supplies they had left. But it wouldn't be enough. The gales only worsened, pinning the survivors down in their tent. They were so close to salvation, yet so far, as outlined in what would be Scott's final journal entry. March 29th, 1912. Since the 21st, we have had a continuous gale from west-southwest and southwest. We had fuel to make 2 cups of tea apiece and bare food for 2 days on the 20th. Every day, we have been ready to start for our depot 11 miles away. But outside the door of the tent, it remains a scene of whirling drift. I do not think we can hope for any better things now. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. R. Scott. For God's sake, look after our people. The final written words of Robert Falcon Scott stopped mid-page. Within days, he and his 2 surviving companions, Edward Wilson and Henry Bowers, froze to death in their tent, only 11 miles from the 1-ton depot that might have saved them. 8 months later, in November of 1912, a search party from the expedition found their snowbound tent. Inside were the frozen bodies of Scott, Wilson, and Bowers, huddled together. Scott's journal lay beside him, carefully wrapped, preserved in the cold. The search party collapsed the tent over their bodies and built a large cairn of snow, marking it with a wooden cross. On it, they inscribed a line from Alfred Tennyson's Ulysses: "To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." For decades, Scott was remembered as a martyr to exploration, a man who died chasing the last great prize of the age. But his own journals and later accounts would reveal a harsher truth. The men were undone not only by the merciless Antarctic cold, but also by flawed planning and fatal miscalculations. Scott had relied on ponies for transport, against the advice of polar veterans who urged the use of dogs. The ponies struggled and died early, the untested snowmobiles broke down, and the dogs, though present, were underutilized and later turned back by confused orders that might otherwise have saved the polar party. Depot shortages, poor rationing, and misjudged distances would seal their fate. Through all of this, Scott's diary endures. At once, a moving record of courage and sacrifice, and also a chilling testament to how human ambition, weighed down by misjudgment, can falter at the edge of the world. David Livingstone was one of the most celebrated explorers of the Victorian era. A Scottish missionary, physician, and adventurer, he spent decades pushing deeper into Africa than any European before him. He mapped rivers, documented cultures, and exposed the horrors of the Arab slave trade. But by the spring of 1873, his circumstances would shift from exploration to survival. Years of disease and exhaustion had taken their toll. Dysentery racked his body, and malaria symptoms came in relentless waves. His companions carried him often when he was too weak to walk through the swamps and jungles of present-day Zambia. Yet even then, he clung to his diary. The words he scratched onto its pages would evolve from grand accounts of exploration to the slow unraveling of a life. April 15th, 1873. Cross Loit Kila again, where it is only 50 yards by canoe, and went southwest for an hour. I, being very weak, had to be carried part of the way, and glad to be resting. Despite his failing health, Livingstone and his faithful companions carried on with their travels in very harsh terrain and even worse weather. April 17th. A tremendous rain after dark burst all our now rotten tents to shreds. We went on at 6:35 a.m. for 3 hours, and I, who was suffering severely all night, had to rest. April 19th. I am excessively weak, and but for the donkey could not move more than 100 yards. It is not all pleasure, this exploration. No observations now, owing to great weakness. I can scarcely hold the pencil. 2 days later, the entries would shrink to basic fragments, his handwriting weak, and his words would be stripped of detail. April 21st. Tried to ride, but was forced to lie down, and they carried me back to the village, exhausted. His companions did what they could, fetching milk from nearby villages, tending to him as he slipped further into weakness. Inside a hut, the once mighty explorer lay confined to his mat, unable to rise. And then came his final written words. On April 27th, 1873, his trembling hand scrawled one last broken line. Knocked up quite and remain. Recover. Sent to buy milk goats. We are on the banks of the Mulilamo. The sentence trails off, unfinished. The ink grows faint. It is the last thought he ever put to paper. 4 days later, on May 1st, 1873, his attendants found him kneeling beside his bed, his head resting on the mattress as if in prayer. David Livingstone was dead from the combined ailments of malaria and internal bleeding from dysentery. True to his wishes, his heart was extracted and buried beneath a tree in the village of Chitambo. Livingstone's faithful attendants, James Chuma and Abdullah Susi, preserved the body as best they could, and then carried him for 63 days at a distance of more than 1,000 miles from Chitambo, Zambia, to the coastal town of Bagamoyo, Tanzania. From there, his remains would be sailed back to Britain, and in 1874, he was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey. The final words of the departed remind us that history isn't just dates and events. It's voices, caught in their most fragile and fleeting moments. A journal's last entry is more than just a writing. It is the echo of a life at its final boundary. And as we close this chapter, we leave those echoes behind in the dark, until we meet again, here in the dark tunnel.